Okay, in this lesson, we're going to be solving inequalities using multiplication. Our objectives here, we're going to be solving one-step inequalities. Just like we used in the last lesson, we're going to be using the multiplication property of inequality. And we're going to be able to graph that on the number line. So, like we've been doing all year, we know that we're going to be using that inverse operation. So the actual problems, these inequalities that we're going to be solving are going to be division problems, and since the inverse of division is multiplication, that's the operation that we're going to use to solve these inequalities. So I'm going to use the book example first, which is c divided by 5 is less than or equal to 13. Well, we know that our goal in algebra, like we've been talking about all year, is to isolate this variable of c. So we're going to isolate working more on this side of the equation because this is where our variable is. So to do that, we're going to multiply both sides by 5. Remember, just like in equations, whatever we do to the left side of the inequality, we have to do to the right side to keep this balanced at all times. So we know that multiplication is going to cancel out the division, and then we just simply do 13 times 5, which gives us 65. So we say c is less than or equal to 65. So now we've solved this inequality, but you're going to need to graph it. So like we did on yesterday's assignment, go ahead and give me a 0 and a -1. And then you can come up here and say 63, 64, 65. We're talking about an inequality that has an or equal to. So we know we're going to be using a closed circle. So we're going to graph on 65. And then we're going to shade to the left because it's less than. So this is pretty straightforward, like what we've been doing with all the other things. There is one change that I will explain more when I come back to class on Wednesday, but something that you need to understand is if you're multiplying by a negative number, we do have to flip our inequality sign. Like I said, I'll talk more about this when I get back to school, but the example in your book gives us p divided by -3 is less than 12. So we're going to multiply both sides by the -3. When we're dealing with inequalities, anytime you multiply or divide by a negative number, you have to flip the sign. So we're going to make this less than sign a greater than sign. And then we know that 12 times -3 is a -36. Like I said, I will explain more when I return about why we flip that sign, but just know for now, when you work on your homework assignment and your class assignment, that you're going to need to flip that inequality to make it a true statement. So here's what I want you to do for classwork with Mr. K, and also you can finish this up for homework. I want you to do workbook pages 69 and 70. And you're going to do numbers 2 through 18. You're going to solve the inequality and graph the inequality. So I want you to solve each one of these and then graph it. Now I do want to show you one more example. So let's say we have 8 is less than x over -2. Okay, so we know that we're going to have to isolate that variable, so we're going to multiply both sides by -2, multiply by -2. So we have to switch this inequality because we multiplied by a negative, so we're going to have -16 is greater than x. But remember from yesterday's lesson, before you can graph, you have to make sure that you flip that inequality back when you move the variable to the left side. So remember that we have the arrow pointing to the x. So when we rewrite this, we want to make sure that that arrow is still pointing to the x. So see, we have the point right here going to the variable. We come down here, we have the point going to the variable, so we know we're correct. So now when we graph this, since it does not have that or equal to sign, we're going to put an open circle and shade to the left. See, if you look back before we flipped it, a lot of you would have wanted to come down here and move that to the right because your arrow is going to the right. But remember, we graph based off of the variable. So if you don't flip it again, then your graph is going to be incorrect. So make sure you get into the habit of flipping, putting that variable on the left. Again, I'll try to have Shobi up for any questions. Mr. K can help you with any questions. Just get this assignment done, and we'll talk more about flipping these inequalities, and we'll move on to division with inequalities when I get back on Wednesday. We'll probably do a little bit of the problem solving, and then we are done with this chapter. So we can look at a test hopefully Friday before we finish up the review for your exam. But if not, no worries. I'll make sure you understand this before we move on for what's going to be on your exam. So y'all behave, and I will see you on Wednesday.